So this thing called gossip is a very interesting phenomenon. Because on one hand, everybody understands, you don't need to be a brilliant rocket scientist to understand that gossiping doesn't have any value. Because who does it benefit exactly? You and I get together and some idle chatter about some other third party, whether it's a rumor or truth and so on, especially something that their misfortune or a scandal, what benefit is there? So I don't think anyone can document any benefit, direct benefit. And yet, I don't know how much money, millions, billions, probably trillions at this point of dollars goes into this industry. There's gossip magazines. They're the biggest sellers. Look, go to any supermarket and see what the magazines are on the way out. It's not The Economist and not Commentary and so on. It's Us, People, Star, National Enquirer, and so on. Then you have, of course, the nightly entertainment shows. And then you have the daily talk shows. I mean, I don't know the numbers, but it's probably in the tens, if not hundreds of millions of people that are consuming. And then we have the water cooler in every office. You don't even need that. You have all these cartoons where somebody whispers to somebody, "Hey, did you hear about that third person?" And then they whisper, and the process starts. Now, of course, the Torah, which addresses everything, talks about this too. It's called Rechilus, Lashon Hara, a whole series of different expressions, Moshe Shemra. We have a whole series of different ways that we express the idea of gossiping about each other. Which means not only, if it's obviously slander and false, but libel, that goes without saying, most of us understand that's inappropriate. But even talking about somebody positively, Lashon Hara doesn't always mean something negative. Even positive, if it has no benefit, why are you talking about it? But yet, human beings succumb to this all the time, and I don't think anybody's not guilty, even though at the same time we know it's a repulsive thing we wouldn't like done about ourselves. The Talmud actually says that Lashon Hara, which means speaking evil about somebody, bad about somebody, and as I said, Lashon Hara could also mean speaking good about somebody without benefit, because ultimately what benefit is there? It's not good if there's no benefit. It says it kills 3 people. So the expression used, Kotlet 3, Tlisa, Katlina Tlisa, it cuts down or kills 3 people. The speaker, the one spoken to, and the third person spoken about. So the one spoken about, we all know. Yeah, because usually saying something, talking to 2 people, talking about a third person, doesn't usually end up being good for him. But even the speaker and the listener are also included in this. So clearly, it's a pretty harsh statement to make. But I'm not going to give you another sermon and another lecture on the evils of Lashon Hara. You can go to any local synagogue for that. You can, I'm sure, find all kinds of people who deal with this issue. I want to talk about it on a far deeper level. So the chapter is one of the more dramatic and I would say controversial chapters in the Torah. The chapter is called Balak. Balak was a king in a country called Moab, the Moabites. This was basically the eastern neighbors where today modern day Jordan would be. And this was on their way to Israel, going from that direction. The only way in crossing the river Jordan, they had to go through Moab. So the chapter begins, the Jews are coming close to the end of their 40-year journey through the wilderness. And they go through Moab. When Moab hears that the Jews are marching, they were frightened. Who knows what the Jews want to do? Conquer this land. What will they do to our resources? So the king of Moab goes ahead and develops a plot. How do we stop the Jewish people? And he goes and commissions the greatest prophet of the time, except Moses. His name was Balaam. The Talmud actually says, in the Torah it says that there was no prophet that rose in Israel like Moses. And they say no prophet in Israel. But outside of Israel, there was Balaam. So Balaam was equated with Moshe himself, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses himself. So you can imagine he was a sorcerer of the highest caliber. And Balak sends messengers to hire and commission Balaam to come to curse the Jews. To basically draw down divine energies that would weaken the Jewish march, the Jewish people. And a long dramatic story, which I won't go into detail, I've discussed it in previous classes, previous years. Bilam, of course, being a true prophet, he was a prophet. He wasn't a con artist. Knew that he can't say anything that God doesn't tell him to say. So he asked God permission. And God says to him, you can't go. These are my people. These are my blessed people. He insists, so God says, fine, go, but you can only go and say what I tell you to say. Okay, so Bilam packs his bags, takes his mule, his jackass, as the Torah says, and begins to go. And there's a whole dramatic episode about that as well, how the donkey will not move. As I said, there are profound psychological lessons in that whole discussion. The chamoyer, the osan, and the conversation that he had with Bilam. But then finally he comes to Balak and he tells him, fine, you're commissioning me, I'm more than happy to do the job. And he had no special love for the Jews himself, Bilam. However, remember, I can only say what God puts in my mouth. And what happens is that he tells Balak, let's prepare some offerings. To set the stage, we have to do a few things to invoke God's blessings on us. And they do all that, and Bilam opens his mouth, and instead of curses come out the most beautiful blessings. The most beautiful blessings you find in the Torah come from this arch enemy of the Jewish people called Bilam. And Balak says to him, what did you do? I commissioned you to curse them. Instead you're blessing them. He says, I told you I can't say anything except what God tells me to say. But let's try again. And they do a second series of offerings and all kinds of machinations. And this time even greater blessings come out. And Balak says, look, at least don't curse them, but don't bless them. He said, I can't. You open the doors now? This is what God is telling me to say. And this goes on 3-4 times. And the blessings, as I said, get better and better. This is actually the only place in the Torah, as Maimonides is right, that actually the Messianic age is alluded to. Of all people, Bilam. Moses also blessed the Jewish people. So did Jacob. So did Abraham. Everybody's blessings all over the place. The greatest blessings of all come from this non-Jewish prophet who was commissioned to curse. What's the end of the story? As we all know, the plot thickens. Bilam finally tells Balak, look, you're not going to have God cooperate in cursing these people. You want to destroy them, you want to attack them, you have to get them to hurt themselves. And he comes up with the best plan of all. Instead of getting a prophet to curse them, what you should do is seduce them. And they send all the Midianite beautiful women to seduce the Jewish people. He says, because only they can weaken themselves. You can't ask God to do it. You can't ask a prophet to do it. And that's sadly what happens. The end of the chapter is Bilam's brilliant advice, which wasn't even prophecy, it was just common sense, was that he tells Balak, that's what you do, and that's what happens. And it causes a major disturbance, a major plague, and that's how the chapter sadly ends. So the prophecy ended up becoming great blessings. And this too has many lessons. Why Bilam didn't give him that advice in the first place, thank God. We ended up getting a lot of blessings, and Balak paid for it all. So that was good. But I guess when they got desperate, it came down to the final thing, no prophecies, so you have to find some other tricks. One of the statements made about this chapter and why this had to happen this way is really a lesson in life itself, which will bring me back soon to the topic we want to talk about, gossip. And that is that sometimes the greatest blessings come from what apparently may be a curse. Essentially the idea of light from the darkness. That when you transform darkness into light, it's a greater light than light that is originally light. Which we know, so most of us know, sadly, from our own experiences. There's much we learn from pleasant and successes, but the deepest lessons we learn from life are our mistakes. We're all human beings, and no human being is perfect. The question is, what do you do with a mistake you make? So many of us like to cover up our mistakes. Many of us like to deny or minimize them. Judaism's answer to mistake is redeeming a mistake. Means you learn from the experience and you don't hide or cover up. You harness the knowledge and experience you've gleaned from that mistake or error or whatever, the negative experience, the challenge. You harness it and you tap into it. And there's a lot of energy there. Just look at human guilt. Human guilt is energy. A person can be consumed with guilt and overwhelmed by it. That means there's a lot of energy. Judaism, especially Jewish mysticism, looks at anything through energy. Even if it's negative energy, but it's energy. That means there's something for you to tap into. Problem is, it's being directed in the wrong place. Think of fire. Fire is power. Without warmth, without fire, we'd have no warmth. We would have no light. We wouldn't have life on this earth. The problem with fire is when it consumes you instead of you harnessing it. So the solution is not to eliminate the fire. The solution is to channel it. The same thing is with any human emotion. Every human emotion, even negative, is energy. That's what it is. The question is who's in control of the energy and where is it going. So when a person is consumed with any feeling, it can be an infatuation, it can be a guilt, it can be anger, raging anger. There's a lot of fire. What Judaism teaches us to do is, besides the discipline to control yourself, that's half the story. The biggest part is redeeming it. Not to eliminate it, but to take that energy and turn it into something positive. Anger, for example, direct it in the right direction, and it can motivate you to do great things. Maybe you should be angry at everything that's evil in this world and become the best person on earth. Everything can be channeled. Now, of course, initially we'd love to be able to just do everything positively without having to deal with negatives and challenges, but that's not how life works. As they say in relationships, love is based on trust. But trust is not based on perfection. When people say, if you were perfect, I could trust you, it's unrealistic. And it's not even true. Trust is based on accountability, not on perfection. That I know that even if you make a mistake, I know you're accountable, that you're honest. That is where trust is built. And you'll see anyone in the healing world, anyone who's suffered, anyone who's gone through difficult times and they don't trust, they'll tell you I only regain trust not because I found perfection. That's unrealistic. That's the first expectation. A child who's been hurt, well, they expect next time, I'm not going to trust until I have perfection. That's a childish attitude, and it makes sense because you know what, I've been hurt, so I'm not going to get into any situation and be vulnerable unless it's perfect. But when you grow and you mature, you realize that's not realistic. What you're going to end up happening is have no relationships. You know, you build so much armor and so many walls that no one can get in, but no one can get out either. So you won't have relationships. You won't have any true love. The real solution is to discover a person who's accountable. That's where trust is built. And learning accountability, then you can learn to trust somebody, because you see they will not lie, they won't cover it up. They're there. They'll be able to address an issue without hiding behind other stuff. So one of the profound lessons of the story of Bilam, why did God make it this way? Why couldn't Moses bless the Jews? You want to give them these beautiful blessings, let Moses bless them. Or find some other, Aaron, Joshua, there's a lot of people to bless them. You have to find someone commissioned to curse them, and from his mouth should come out blessings, which is great. I mean, the end of the story is beautiful. The great blessings. Many of them we actually say in our daily prayers, which I'll soon discuss. And many of them refer to the end of times. The answer is because it's not just a nice narrative. He could have cursed them this. It's a lesson in life. It's a lesson in life. Things come your way. They may appear like curses. They may appear like a challenge that you may think is the worst thing that happened to you. And it ends up being, if you really know how to read it, can end up being the greatest blessings. I once gave a long talk on this in a different chapter where we do have in the Torah curses, unfortunately. There are 2-3 chapters where there are actual seemingly curses. And that too is explained as being deeper blessings. The famous story with Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, who sent his son, Rabbi Elazar, to go get a blessing from the great sages of the time. So he traveled and he arrived there, and instead of blessings, what he heard was curses. Came back to his father and says, so what'd they say? He says, you sent me for blessings, they cursed me. His father said to him, no, they didn't curse you. What they really said was all blessings. You just have to know how to read it. It appeared, the words seemed like a curse. So everyone has the commentaries, all ask the question, and if you're interested in more on this, I'm not going to elaborate extensively because I've written a whole article on this, all the different explanations of this strange Talmud. So if you're interested, just email us and I'll be happy to send it to you, or you can look for it on our site, Meaning for Life. So the question is, why? So why are they playing game? The sages, they couldn't just say a blessing, but they have to make someone cause aggravation and so on. And there are different answers given. Some say the answer is because they saw in this person's Rabbi Elazar's destiny, they saw that he would have to maybe suffer. So they decided to take the words of suffering and rechannel it, so that would alleviate that issue. That's one interpretation given. But in Hasidic thought, there's an explanation given, because the deepest blessings are sometimes in the most concealed places. Where do you have the most intense energy? Today in astronomy, in science, where's the most intense energy? A black hole is the most intense. It's so powerful, the gravitational pull, that no light can escape. That's a black hole. You can't even see light. So you see, look at it, it's black hole. If someone understands how the intensity, it's actually the opposite. That's why you'll find many Hasidic Rebbes or many people who really understood human beings. When someone came to them, everyone said this person is hopeless. They're filled with so much anger, so much bitterness, so much antipathy and so on, and they were able to see, yes, they're filled, but that's energy. That means there's something that's driving this person. And when you tap into it, you know how to tap into it, you create the most enormous amount of power. So essentially, what these sages were doing were empowering him, because now he had to dig and find what the deeper meaning, and as a result, got even deeper blessings. Now, this doesn't mean we ask upon ourselves curses, God forbid, nor do we ask for challenges. It just means that a challenge is always an opportunity. And that you may have resources right now inside of you that no way would ever be revealed if everything was going well. But there's a challenge, and suddenly you have to resort to accessing deeper strengths, and you have no choice because it's a challenge. And suddenly you realize I have strengths like this. And those strengths now can be applied to all kinds of other situations. So sometimes the exact thing you don't want is the exact thing you need to discover yourself. Of course, if we're wise people, we don't have to wait to hit rock bottom and wait for a disaster, God forbid. We have to bring challenges upon ourselves. Healthy people challenge themselves all the time. They don't wait for someone else to challenge them. One of the Rebbes, the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Chabad Rebbe, once said to a chassid, it's pretty harsh terms, but has a powerful message. He said to him, life breaks everybody. Break yourself before you're broken, because when you're broken, not through your initiation, it could be worse, be far worse. Actually, he said when he breaks, which means when God breaks, it's sometimes not the way you like it. So the second half is very harsh, but the first half, break yourself. What does that mean, break yourself? Don't go, it doesn't mean become bitter. It means challenge yourself. Go beyond the natural expectation. The Talmud says, this was explained in Tanya, chapter 15. The Talmud says an interesting thing. During the times of the Talmud, it was a custom that when students would study a tractate or any text, they would review their studies 100 times, which itself is quite admirable. How many people review their studies 100 times? But the Talmud says something even more powerful. It says that someone who reviews their studies 100 times is called someone that's not serving God, because it's a habit, it's a routine. If you study 101, you go beyond that 100 to 101, you break yourself, you break your nature. That one is worth more than the 100. Obviously you can't get to it without the 100, because you've changed something, you've changed a pattern, you've changed a routine, and that always opens up a door. People who are naturally curious, there's not people who say voracious readers. It's not like they come to a limit, I've read enough books. There's always more. Intelligent people, they're always looking for more information. I've saturated myself, I don't need any more knowledge. You ever hear anyone say that? So, when a person's in that phase, they're always breaking themselves. What means breaking? Not a negative breaking, it's a positive breaking. It's breaking your pattern and habit. That always brings greatness out of human beings. Sometimes you need a sparring partner to help you achieve that. So this is one of the major lessons that we can learn from Bilam. But I want to bring it back to our topic, because it's very much related. This isn't just an introduction. It's very much related. Whenever you look at human behavior, there's symptoms and there are causes. So we have it called the remedial medicine. It's a remedy to a situation. A person has a headache, you take an aspirin. Pain, painkiller. You cut yourself, a Band-Aid. We all have our immediate solutions to our problem. which is fine, frankly, for superficial issues and problems. Then there's what's called preventive medicine, or even deeper, root medicine, where you're not just dealing with a symptom, you're dealing with a cause. Now, the fact of the matter is, especially when it comes to psychological and emotional issues, most people defining their problem in that area of relationships, family, children, parents, spouses, anything that very rarely, and I can talk from my own experience, very rarely when someone says the problem that this is actually the problem. They usually tell you the symptoms of the problem, if at all. Not because they're necessarily concealing, because we are identified with symptoms. I know my finger is bleeding, God forbid. I feel pain here. Roots are not sensed. We don't feel it until it expresses itself. But when it comes to deeper issues, the only solution really is at the root. One of the beautiful things or powerful things about the Torah is that it is all based on root. Obviously, we always need short-term solutions to things for immediate, to stop the bleeding, so to speak, or to just minimize the immediate challenge. But the real solution, as I said before, with harnessing, it's not just getting rid of the anger or getting rid of the pain or the guilt or anything. It's channeling, because then you have a permanent solution. If you stop someone's energy and say, you know what, just control yourself, you may be successful, but you haven't really closed the engine down. You just made somebody suppress themselves. If you know how to channel it, then you know the energy is now directed in the right place. You're assured that you really have a solution. So when it comes to any issue that you see about human nature, about ourselves, this is a rule across the board. An issue that you are struggling with, or hopefully you're aware of. If you're not aware of it, or you're not ready to be aware of, obviously no conversation. But we all have our stuff. First question to ask yourself before you even get any consultation or advice is this a symptom or is it a root? Now, it's not a comfortable question to ask, frankly, because nobody wants to hear about roots. I'd love to hear it's just a symptom. I take care of it and we go, push it under the carpet and then we go move on. That's always the easiest approach, and we're all guilty of that, including myself. We all do that. But if you're somewhat a little more thoughtful and a little more honest, at times you start saying, hey, 1 second, but there's a pattern here. I deal with this very often. We talk about New York is the mecca of single life, and relationships is what we call a challenge here. So people have, I can't tell you how many episodes I've had where singles, not only the Upper West Side, but the Upper East Side or Midtown or anywhere, come and say, Rabbi, I've tried everything. I've dated, I did this, I did that. You got to help me. And then when you start listing and going through the usual suspects, often people will tell you, I did everything. There's something else going on. Sometimes a few people have told me even, I think there's a curse on me, an ayin hara or something. And I say, well, listen, maybe there's other options. Maybe there are other possibilities. And very few people really want to look at themselves. If they see something's not working in different directions, you have to look at what maybe you're doing something wrong. You can't always blame somebody else. And it's not so easy to do. So when it comes to things like gossip, or I will speak about anything now, any addiction, anything we are seduced by, anything that that attracts us, it positive or negative, rest assured this is a divine providence. Why do you involved in that? Because it's meant to wake you up to a part of yourself. Because if you're not drawn to something, then it's not for you. If you're drawn to something, the question is why? Why do you need that? Why do you need it? Let's speak about negative things, because positive things it's a little harder to discuss, because positive you can say I need it because I feel it's a good and healthy thing. If a person, let's say, is involved with any type of particular addiction, whether it's drug or alcohol, sex addiction, gambling, other things that control your life, why? What is the root? What appetite is it fueling? Is it feeding? What hunger? That's the most important question of all. It's not the question to say that is destructive, or to say how do I stop. That's a symptomatic question. The question is why are you hungry for it? What causes you to? Now we all know, for example, if you see somebody drinking in a desert and they're drinking poison, toxins, to the point that you know they're going to kill themselves, the answer is very simple. Their problem is because they're thirsty and they can't find water. So they're drinking whatever comes their way. The answer is exactly the same with any of our so-called compulsions and obsessions. You're hungry for something. What you're hungry for, you can't find one way, so you find whatever came your way. The easier way, whatever came first, whatever a friend may have introduced. And then that becomes your addiction. Mediocre people have mediocre addictions. They're not addicted to things. It's passionate people that get addicted because you're passionate and there's nowhere to put the passion. So the thing that you're hungry for becomes your passion. So a thing like gossip, which some can see as innocuous, as I said, how many billions of dollars and millions of people are watching and reading and hearing and talking and so on, is a symptom, but there's a deeper root that lies at the heart of it. And that deeper root is addressed in this week's chapter. It's addressed also in essentially the essence of what makes us human beings. And maybe a good way to begin is also that tonight, also a special day, especially on a personal level, because in the tradition I grew up in, Chabad, tonight's a holiday called Yud Beis Tammuz, 12th of Tammuz. 12th and 13th of Tammuz is considered a Chag HaGeula. 86 years ago, the previous Chabad Rebbe was redeemed from prison on this day. What prison? It was Soviet prisons in 1927 under Stalin. You heard of Joseph Stalin, who was not far from his counterpart in Germany. A good match for each other. And actually one ended up cancelling out the other. Thank God. It was when the Nazis tried to attack Hitler, tried to attack Russia. And this man did everything possible to extinguish Judaism, Jewish life in this former Soviet Union. Now you have to remember, some estimates, there were 10 million Jews in the 20s in Russia. No one knows really. They were definitely the largest population by the turn of the century, because the American Jewry basically, except the Sephardic, but the two big immigrations of Jews in America was number one in the 1900s, 1900, 1905, due to the pogroms in Eastern Europe. And the second immigration was essentially the second half of the century, after the World War II. So whatever the numbers were, it was a massive amount. And here suddenly the Bolsheviks, who saw religion as the opiate of the masses, using Karl Marx's term, decided to outlaw everything that's religious, especially Jews. Jews are always they call the miner's canary, are always the lightning rod. You can rest assured, you attack the Jews, you can rest assured that trouble's coming. Not just to the Jews. Hitler and the Nazis did it, and Stalin did it in his own way. Basically outlawed everything. Many, many Jewish leaders at the time, many in Russia, said, the time has come for us to leave this country. And they did that. But you can't have millions of people leave. What happens? The previous Lubavitch Rebbe, his name was Rav Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, the sixth in the line dynasty, beginning from the Baal HaTanya, the Reb Shneir Zalman who started several hundred years ago in the 19th century, author of the Tanya. He said we have to do everything possible to preserve Judaism, and we can't just run and leave the ship sinking. And he created a whole scheme of underground synagogues and underground efforts and activities to keep the spark alive as much as possible, humanly possible. The whole story, that's even a personal story that I'm with my own namesake, my grandfather, who was part of a secret group of 10 people who, with the Rebbe called in 1923 and created what they called a blood pact, that they would do everything possible to keep the Jewish spark alive, to circumcise children, bar mitzvah people, teach, slaughter kosher meat, secret synagogues, secret mikvahs, whatever it took. Till this day, there still remain remnants of those efforts. Well, the Bolsheviks did not take this lightly. They didn't like it, especially the Jewish department of the Bolsheviks. As we all know, the greatest anti-Semites are Semites, called Jews. And they were called the Yevsektia. They were the Jewish branch of the communists. And they particularly hated anything that smelled from Judaism and religion. And they went after the Rabbi Schneerson, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak. And finally they arrested him in 1927. Now you have to remember there was no such thing as due process and justice as we know it. Even the justice we know is not perfect, but that there was altogether the prosecutor, and that was it. And he could have been killed like that. And he was almost killed several times. They tortured him, they punished him, they did all that. He was in prison. He was in prison for exactly, he went the 15th of Sivan, and on the 3rd of Tammuz, so basically 18 days in prison, which was, as he writes in his own memoirs, diary, which he calls Tractate from Hell. Masechta Gehenim, that's what he calls it. And he describes his ordeals there. And without mercy, remember there was no due process, there was no protecting his interests. And what's the word? They interrogated, but then they ruled him to death. What was the call? They sentenced him to death. And then they decided to sentence him. There was a lot of political and international pressure. They decided to sentence him to 10 years in exile, which turned out to be 3 years in exile. And that finally was reversed, and he was freed. And a little while later, around a half a year later, he actually left the Soviet Union. They forced him out of the country, went to Europe, from one hell to another hell. And then he had to escape that too, and came to the United States in 1940. And I would not be sitting here if it were not for him, so it's important to pay tribute, and especially on a day and night like this. What was the secret? So you have to remember, it was very similar to the story with Bilam, which is this week's Parsha. Also negative forces. These Jewish communists were unbelievably hateful, and they were, interestingly, who were they? They spoke Yiddish to the Rebbe, because they were grandchildren of Hasidim, of this Rebbe's grandfather, Tzemach Tzedek, the people who arrested him. So it's a pretty nice setup. This would be, if it wasn't so tragic, it'd be a nice film. And they come to arrest him, and one of them says to the Rebbe, Rebbe, I'll carry your bags, like my grandfather carried your grandfather's bags. So he says, yeah, okay, well, your grandfather carried my grandfather's bags where my grandfather wanted to go. And you want to carry my bags where you want to go? No, you're not carrying my bags. Now, don't play chassid with me. And this became this type of banter between them, where they continuously would invoke their own roots, but they were using it for all the negative reasons. Finally, the Rebbe had made a decision, as he writes in his diary, that he would not succumb one drop. Nothing. He spoke fluent Russian, he'll speak only Yiddish. He wanted to put on tefillin every day. I mean, this was unheard of. You were talking about in a prison, where even from a halachic point of view, it's life and death. I mean, life and death, you don't have to fight for a mitzvah. Except the 3 things that one has to die for before they violate. And yet, he took this position, and he writes clearly, for his own morale, that if I give in one drop, I'm over with. And he stood fast and would not cooperate with anything. And there are many, many different details of the story. And there's one of the most dramatic episodes is when one of these Jews say to him, enough is enough, Rebbe. He points a pistol to his head and says, time to cooperate. This pistol here has changed many a mind. And the Rebbe, unflinching, said to him, this toy can frighten someone that has one world and many gods, but not someone who has one God and many or 2 worlds. And the man said to him, this Jewish communist said to him, Rebbe, we'll see who prevails. And the Rebbe responded, yeah, we'll see, ver vemen, who will prevail. Okay. Now where are we today? 86 years later. This communist was basically killed within a year, as everybody was killed. Stalin was a great killer. He would kill his assistant and hire someone else and then kill that person. He was constantly killing everybody. And he had a particular sadistic way of doing it. He would invite you and your family and say, go to Paris, we'll pay all expenses, have a good party there. You had to come back because you held the rest of your family hostage. That was his way. That, you can party all the time and you're coming back. We all know how he killed Trotsky. He killed his own son, was able to sleep at night. So you're talking about a psychopath. He came to power. And who prevailed? Well, I'm sitting here as a grandson of one of the 10 people that were part of that pact. That Rebbe did come out of prison, and finally came to America. He had a son-in-law called Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who was my Rebbe, who I personally worked for. And the Judaism I see today has survived. I don't know where the grandchildren of all those people are. So I'm a living witness who prevailed. At the time, no one would have been able to write such a script. There's no way that the Rebbe would have been able to come out. People were killed by like flies. It was just a matter of someone could have just pulled a gun and that would have been all over. There was no some type of legal system, recourse. So it's a fascinating story of inspiration, literally at the brink of disaster. But shouldn't surprise us all, because all of Judaism was built on this. How many times have we faced the abyss? After the Holocaust, why don't you read some newspaper accounts in 1945? Obituary after obituary that the Jewish people will not exist by the year 2000. And it makes total sense. It wasn't a pessimistic forecast. 1/3 of the Jewish people were killed. And not just a third of the cream of the crop. Hundreds of thousands of teachers, rabbis, parents. The whole Jewish life was uprooted over 1,000 more years in the whole Eastern Europe and Central Europe. Who would expect that you could rebuild after that? Everyone else was demoralized. America assimilation was taking over. There was no Israel. Who would expect any renaissance? So anything is a miracle, especially that you see a thriving. Go back to Russia now. I was in Moscow a few years ago. And I went to places these were the places where they were arrested. These were places where and you see a thriving Jewish life. Nothing's perfect in this world, but who prevailed? 2 words from the Rebbe, ver vemen, who? We'll see who over whom. And the Rebbe was not just faith, he knew Jewish history. That's how it's been the story from Abraham till this day. This is documented. This isn't based on faith. So if you need empowerment next time you feel a little despair because, let's say your dessert wasn't so good, think about these stories. What we struggle with today is not comparable. It's not life and death. I'm not suggesting that we don't have our own little personal holocausts and challenges and losses, and everyone, we know when you're suffering inside, you don't really care about other greater suffering. For you, it's suffering. So I'm not minimizing it. But these stories are meant to give strength, and it's all the darkness into light. Bilam. And that was always the secret. Not only don't we succumb to the negative, we turn challenges into energy and harness it into powerful forces. So when I see that, let's say, a few $100 billion is spent annually on gossip magazines and on entertainment shows, it's prime time. Entertainment tonight. How many entertainment shows are on every night? There are people tell me they record them because they can't see them all at once, so they watch them later. Basically, the Hollywood gossip about celebrities that really will benefit nobody and not even you, but it fills it's entertaining, to follow, and the magazines and so on. And I'm not here. The cynical side of it, is easy to do and dismiss it, and how it's meaningless and so on. And it's a commentary on society today, on life today. I want to address what I was taught, that when you see something, so much energy going into something, even if it's complete ridiculous, what's the energy coming from? Why do people like to talk? Why do people like to gossip? Why do we like to hear gossip? Is it because we're bad people and we just like to hear bad things about other people? Makes us feel better? Some psychologists say that that's the root of it all. It's called in Yiddish, there's nishvaginen. There's no real English word, and they say in English they use schadenfreude to express the idea. What does it mean? Someone else gains something, you gain nothing from them losing it, but you enjoy if they lose it. Question is, where's this weird personality feature come from? I'm sure nobody here has ever succumbed to that, but there are people on this earth that have that. This one's benefiting, this one's not losing. If that person fails or falls, you will gain nothing. Why would you have celebration over them falling? So some psychologists say, because we're insecure. So if everybody's, and we feel we're failures, if you feel you're a loser, it makes you feel a little better if everybody else is a loser. That way you don't stand out that much. You know? Like if you see someone really ambitious or successful, and you're not that way, it makes you feel bad. So if everybody is more or less falling, hey, I'm not so bad after all. Not a bad theory. And I would say it's probably true, and express itself in many other ways. Which really comes down, if you talk about the root of this, would be then insecurity. An insecure individual. So I was thinking about it, and I was saying, is there gossip, let's say, in heaven? Do souls chatter about each other? And the answer, of course, is no. Now, why not? What kind of climate and environment is there that's different than down here? And that can help us, And if you look around, in general, you want to look at, sometimes see human flaws. A good way to understand human flaws, you look at a person that doesn't have that flaw and say, what makes that person tick? Why is that person not succumbing or not driven or obsessed with things that I'm driven by or something? And maybe you'll find an ingredient or two. So in heaven, most of us understand that there's no chatter or gossip. You know why? Because they don't need to, and there's nothing that no one has any benefit there from doing so, and they're aware of that fact. And you can come down and say that's very much connected to security. If you know who you are, and you wake up in the morning, and you come out of bed, jump out of bed excited about your day and about your life, and you know why you're here, nothing in this world can shake you. However, if you don't have that, then everything is going to shake you, because you're dependent on other people for your recognition, for affirmation. Now, the fact is, that's how God created it. Little children born into families, like all of us. We were once all little children, believe it or not. Right? I have a living witness here that knows I was a little child once. You may not know this, but I have my mother here this evening. Not online here, right here. The young blonde right in the back. Did you know that? Okay. And but believe it or not, you were also once a little child. Like someone told me a few years Rosh Hashanah, someone from this class who lives now in another country, sent me a picture of herself when she was a little girl, like maybe 3 years old. And she writes me 3 lines that made my whole Rosh Hashanah, broke my heart. She writes, "What happened to this little child?" So Rosh Hashanah, I had what to think about during my prayers, and I wrote it back between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, a warm letter, trying to say, we're all trying to find what happened to that little child. That innocent, pure child, unjaded, that was not affected, came out of his mother's womb, everything possible. But God made it in His own, I won't call it sadistic, but definitely in His own interesting way. Didn't make it so simple. You're born, I remember my son when he was a little kid was excited coming home. He told me a line. He says, "I heard today that really," and it impacted me because it impacted him. He said to me, "You're born an original. Don't become a copy." But we become copies. We become conformists. Nobody's born a conformist, by the way. So you have no excuse. It's not inherent. It's acquired. It's an acquired skill. An acquired. So we're born, but we're born into families, and our families are expected to nurture us, to nurture and to cultivate and to allow us to develop our sense of confidence and security and significance, that we do not be dependent on others for that. Now, we all need each other, obviously, even as we're older, but when a child has that from a young age, they're armed with whatever they need. Imena nili mili, if I'm not for myself, who I'll be, starts when the moment you're born. Now, till you come out of your mother's womb, nobody can take that from you. Because in your mother's womb, whether your mother or father likes it or not, or anyone else does, God made it as such that you will be nurtured, period. You'll be fed. You'll have everything you need. Now, obviously, God forbid, a mother in pregnancy can also cause damage to her child, but let's not talk about exceptions. But once the umbilical cord is cut, there's a new umbilical cord that you're dependent on. That those around you will nurture you. And they will affirm, not that they created, they will affirm that you're God's gift. And that you matter Birth is God saying you matter, and that you are absolutely indispensable. Not an arrogance, but just a sense of self. And as you grow and you develop that sense of self, so then when you begin to interact with the world around you, you don't need others for your security, for your confidence. So why would a person like that need to talk about anybody else? So it's very clear that if you need to talk about someone that gives you pleasure and there's no benefit, it maybe means that you don't know who you are. If you're driven by a mission 24/7 and you're fully confident and secure in it, that's what it is. Why would you have to spend time entertaining yourself with idle chatter and gossip about other people? So you could answer that one of the reasons that people are so consumed with that is because, yes, they basically don't have a life that's really generated from within. Maybe partially, yes, but it's not something that really consumes them 24/7, so their energy is going elsewhere. It's going to an easy thing, an easy target to discuss, to speak about others. So Bilam, of all people, sensed something. One of the blessings that he shared, that he says, that we have become part of the morning prayer, is the famous prayer, Ma toivu oyalecha Yaakov, mishkanesecha Yisrael. Literally means, how good, how pleasant are the tents of Jacob and the dwelling places of Israel. So the commentaries ask Rashi and the Talmud and the Medrash, what does this mean? What did he see? What was so pleasant about these? What were the nice tents? They were nice. They were comfortable, cozy, warm. It says that they were situated in a certain way, that no one built a tent whose door faced the door of the other tent, which becomes a law actually in the Torah, that when you build a home, you do not build a door or a window facing another person's window. In other words, to keep your nose to yourself and not in someone else's kitchen. We say, seeing someone else's washing their laundry. If you've ever been to a bungalow colony, you can realize why some people don't like bungalow colonies, because that's how they're built. I don't know if the doors exactly facing each other, but the environment is definitely such environment. It's interesting. This is what he blesses the Jews with. Matevu, look how beautiful, how pleasant their homes are. Now you may think this is like a petty thing. Doors are facing each other, not facing each other. No other blessing that Bilam could say. I mean, there are other blessings. And this becomes our morning prayers, because it's far deeper than just a matter of meddling in other people's business. It's about, what is your oil? What does your tent look like? What does your environment, your home look like? What does your personality look like? So I go back to the story with the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. He said this toy can frighten someone that has one world and many gods, not someone that has one God and many worlds. You have one world, this material world. So some psychologists, and definitely the Buddhists, argue that one of the greatest fears, the fear that drives all human fears, is the fear of death. So though we don't think about it maybe overtly all the time, but it's the fear that we will end one day. And that creates a fundamental insecurity in every human being. So all the drives we have, the ambitions, the successes, are all trying to somewhat make some impact, that we shouldn't be completely insignificant. And this fear of death drives all fears. Whether you agree with it or not agree is not really so relevant topic here. But the idea that we have fear in ourselves, and I don't mean fear, the overt sense you walk outside at night, you fear a thief or a burglar. That there's a fundamental fear in us. Think about next time you have to have a confrontation, or fear of trying something new, the unknown. They're fears. So what the Rebbe was saying, a very powerful statement, which essentially echoes what all the Torah says, especially in this chapter, and that is, if you have one world and many gods, you're going to be afraid of everything, because your world is going to disappear. Every day there's another god that goes a different direction. There's nothing to build upon. For many people, God today is money, power, control. Now tell me, how could you build a long-term plan on something that is not long-term, that dissipates? Imagine someone saying, the foundation of a building that I want to sell to you is a quicksand. Or it's some foundation that's built on something that doesn't last long. It lasts as long as your money or your food. It's not exactly the foundation you want. You want a foundation that's everlasting. So what the Rebbe was saying was very simple. He says, if you have one world and many gods, you'll be frightened all the time. You have one God, eternal, immortal, and many worlds. I have many dimensions to my life. You're going to take my physical life, I have a spiritual life. You take me, I have my children and my family. Not that, God forbid, he wanted to go or be killed, but you're not frightening me just because you think you have a gun in your hand. Now, of course, it takes a Rebbe to have such presence. I'm not suggesting we all can feel that way with a gun to our heads. But on a more subtle level, everybody has this challenge. What frightens you? They say today everybody's for sale, which is a sad commentary. Everybody's for sale. It's just a matter of what price. Is that true? Do you think you're for sale? Would you like to think that someone spends enough or gives you whatever? It doesn't always mean money. It could be something else that you actually would compromise. Now, unfortunately, we've seen torture and other situations where people compromise things that no one would ever imagine. We see today in incidents where people go on a mountain, there's an avalanche, they're left without food, and they can turn on each other, turn to cannibalism. And he asked the people, do you think you'd be a cannibal? It's like mine, but you think impossible. But who knows what hunger does? Who knows what pressure does? Who knows when you're under those circumstances? No one should ever be tested. In those years in Stalinist Russia and those years under Nazi Germany, there were unfortunately people who became kapos, and there were people who sold out their own mother and father and brothers and sisters to save their own skin, which didn't help. It's like what Churchill said: appeasement is feeding others to crocodiles in the hope that you'll be eaten last. Like that guy the two guys go camping, and he wakes up in the middle of the night and he hears a bear scratching around the tent. So he says to his friend, "Hey, listen, there's a bear. We got to get out of here." And the friend sees this guy's tying his shoelaces, tying his sneakers. He says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm going to run." He says, "But you can't outrun the bear." He says, "I don't have to outrun the bear. I have to outrun you." Very life affirming, right? Well, this is called dog eats dog, the survival of the fittest. So no one should ever be tested. But who knows what we're made of? Because we live in a fragile world, and this is exactly the world, an insecure world. And insecurity and fears drive us much more than we'll ever acknowledge. Not because something happened, because life is an insecure place. The mystics say this world is controlled by what's called the Tzimtzum Harishin. So, like they say, it's not the economy, stupid, it's not this, it's the Tzimtzum that caused all our problems. Yeah, you can blame the grand old Tzimtzum that God put in place. What's a Tzimtzum? Tzimtzum is a fundamental concealment that created a quantum leap that turned everything inside out. Which means, imagine that life is your hand, and then you put a glove on, and suddenly the glove thinks it's in control. Inside out. When the fact is, the spirit and soul should control existence. The material world controls. What controls your attention? You walk down the street. Who tells you what to look at or what not? Your soul or your body? Right? Because we are affected, we're sensory creatures affected by sensory stimulation, and that's what controls us. So it's very difficult to live a life and say one God and many worlds. This is the world that we know and we worship. In a world like that, all the vices, including gossip and the others, are dominant, reign dominant, because that's the tools of an insecure world. Same thing like jealousy. You ever think about jealousy? What is jealousy exactly? How does it help you be jealous of somebody else? If you are completely secure in your own life and everything you have what you need, and you're confident with it, you wouldn't need to be jealous. You wouldn't even be caring what happens with someone else. So you'll see the root of a lot of all this is insecurity. Now, most people wouldn't identify gossip with insecurity. As a matter of fact, I even saw some evolutionist psychologists explain the benefits of gossip, if it's not taken to extreme, is the importance of keeping a society honest. So people know it's like a deterrent. You know that you'll be talked about if you do something wrong. So in the olden days, billions of years ago, animals evolved Gossip was a way of keeping people in line. Well, and that's the root of why People Magazine and Us Magazine and Star and so on are so successful. I'm being said somewhat sarcastically. I would say that gossip is, if that was even the cause, it's gone far away from there, because today it's not about keeping people in line. Most gossip is just what's called a shma. You just gossip to gossip. And it ultimately is a way of filling time that doesn't have any benefit, because you don't necessarily think your life is beneficial. If you, did someone lose a sense of direction? Someone lost, huh? Yeah. I was once with somebody who says to me, I need a GPS. I said, you have one right here. He says, no, I need, for my life, I don't know where I'm going. Yeah, there's no GPS that's been created for that yet. So, I personally saw in the Rebbe, and I didn't know his father-in-law, but I assume he was the same way. There are people who every second of their lives were committed to mission. And for them, a second that was wasted was like a second that died. Like a life that died. Imagine you're given 365 children to watch over. They're your children. And if one is wasted, it's like a dead, God forbid, a child that died. It's 365 days in the year. And every second is a life. Now, we don't have such intensity, nor are we interested in having such type of responsibility. We have a thing called leisure. I'm hanging out. I'm just, what am I doing? I'm hanging out. I'm just relaxing. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not suggesting one shouldn't relax. But think of the other side of things. Someone who is on a mission every second. So every second is important. How would they have time or interest in talking about anybody else? Unless it's part of their mission. Now, this is not a question we usually ask. If we ask this once in our lifetimes, once in our day, we'd be in good shape. So that's what Bilam saw when he saw Mateva Elecha Yaakov. He saw the beauty of how a home, a tent, a dwelling place should be built. What is a dwelling place? Elecha. It's a place that gives off light. The temple, was built in an interesting way. They had windows. But most windows are either just plain windows, or if you're going to build a window, you want to bring light in, so how would you build it? You'd have narrow outside and wide on the inside, so it expands. That's how they do, like skylights. The temple was built the other way around. There was narrow windows on the inside, shkufim atumim, and it went wide to the outside, which is a little weird. So if the light shined in, think of going inside the temple, and you see a window with a little speck of light coming in. It should have been the other way around. A little light, then spreads. So the Talmud answers with a question. The temple is the house of God. V'chila eirahu tzarich. Does God then need light? His light is to give light. His role is to give, not to take. So here's another good question you could ask yourself if you want to make yourself uncomfortable. Are you fundamentally a taker or a giver? So we all know the scene in the Frisco Kid where the train robber robs everybody's jewelry and possessions, and before he jumps off, he tells everybody, remember the lesson in life. It's always better to give than to take. They're trying to console them. They should feel good that they gave him some charity. Now, the tendency is to take in this world. Why? Because we never have enough. We never know how much will be enough. You could ask this to people who have $1 in their bank account, people who have billions of dollars in the bank account. I never know will be enough. Because materialism by nature is an insecure entity. And insecurity always elicits insecurity. Insecure people will make you feel insecure. Insecure items will make you feel insecure. Someone says to you, they call it, the department's called securities, right? They call it financial securities. But if someone says to you, here, I'll give you security by giving you something that doesn't have any permanence, how secure can you be? Be secure. You know why? Because I'm giving you food today. You say, well, second, what happens tomorrow? I'll give you for tomorrow too, but what about the next day? So the worship of one world immediately worships insecurity, and it has to cause you to be insecure. Again, I'm not suggesting we can go cold turkey and change the whole picture, but you have to know the root of our challenges. And that immediately is going to lead to anything to satisfy whatever you need to keep yourself happy. Oh, jealousy, gossip, and all these things, they work perfectly in such a world. In a world in heaven, what do souls do in heaven? Well, we all know that some people say, I'd like to have heaven for its climate and hell for the company. Because more exciting people are in hell, obviously. But that's all jokes aside. What does a spiritual entity do? Spiritual entity is completely secure. It doesn't need food. It doesn't need money. It doesn't need anything that's temporary. It's involved with permanence. Involved in permanence, where's there room for talking about somebody else? I make a suggestion very often, counseling couples, families. And just recently I remember just one example. The family that was falling apart, basically. As the children were getting older, teenagers. So they were their observant family, they keep Shabbos. So Shabbos was always the so-called oasis. All week things are not working, at least Friday night. And then Friday night start falling apart. The 7-year-old son stays in his room. This one is fighting with this one. Another child decides to take off. So I'm having this conversation with the mother and the father about this. And I say to them, so what does Shabbos table look like in your house? Like, what goes on at the table? If it was up to you. Okay, we sing some songs, foods. I say, is it exciting to be at your table? Would I like it? Would I enjoy it? Or is it boring? They say, it's pretty boring. We're also pretty bored. So you have any guests ever? Is there any arguments? Good arguments. Does God exist? You ever debate that at Shabbos table? No. We all believe in God. Everything is cool. That. So I said, so why would a 70-year-old want to sit at a table that's boring? There's a lot of adventures out there. Online, go to Manhattan. They start saying, God forbid, we're still Shomer Shabbos. I said, yeah, but it's not. If you keep it up, why would he want to stay there? Because in this world, there's two things, my friends. You're either influencing or you're being influenced. That Rebbe could influence because he was not influenced by others. He was influenced. You're either being influenced or you're influencing. Either your oil, your tent, is giving off light or it's absorbing other things. There's really a third option. Because we have no neutral state. There's no such thing as a vacuum in nature. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does a person. Do you ever have a situation where your mind is not working? Your thoughts are not? There's a thing, expression, machshava meshetetes tamid. Thought is a wheel. We're always thinking. The question is what we're thinking about. There's no such thing as an empty thought. Try to think about consciously during the day. You may be thinking about things that are ridiculous or meaningless, but the thought is there. So you're either thinking about something positive or you're thinking about something meaningless or something negative. It depends on what your oil looks like. If you are generating light and you're giving off, it's a home that is contributing. And if the children saw and everybody saw that this home was giving off something, great. But what do you think happens if that Friday night dinner, or for that matter any time, becomes a time for gossip? Which I discovered was also part, start talking about this one and that family, and this one did this and that one did that. What do you think is going to tell me what you think the long-term results of a steady diet of such conversations? In innocent children, what's going to result? Again, you don't need to be brilliant to understand. The result is, that's my life. My life is based on talking about other people. Which really is a subtle message saying, I have nothing to say for myself. The only thing I can talk about is somebody else. What do you stand for? A lot of Jews today will say, I don't want to be an anti-Semite. What does Judaism stand for besides anti-racism? Or anti-Semites? What's your vision? Israel is suffering a crisis like this today. There was a time where the war was to find a homeland. Now we have the homeland. So what do we stand for? What's the plan, the 50-year plan now? What's the vision? It's a big struggle. What's the vision for the future? So many say just that we should be at peace with the Arabs at peace. That a vision? That's simply saying you want peace. Young people want a vision, older people, everybody wants a vision. You don't have a vision looking forward, you become playing defense, guaranteed that that vacuum is going to lead to stuff like gossip and other stuff. It has to. Because what else are you filling it up with? So I'm not talking about now that the danger is the destruction I mentioned before, 3 people killed when you speak Lashon Hara and so on. That's a result of it all. The question is the root of it all. So you look at your life and look at what you're involved in, guaranteed it will illuminate what you're made of, what your personality is like. Just today I was telling somebody, I said, you want to deal with a negative situation? How much light is going on in your life? Because there's only room for that much. You put more light, there's less room for something else. It's very hard to fight demons. It's very hard to fight darkness. The best way is you bring light and automatically it dispels. I know it sounds like a simple formula. Why it's difficult is because when you're addicted to your own thoughts and you're consumed with whatever it is that you think is your problem, it's very hard to think from that outside direction, from the outside. That's why you sometimes need someone else to say it. So Bilam was giving the Jews the greatest blessing of all. It seems simple, but it's not so simple. That you will have beautiful homes because you have what to give. So you don't need others to feed your diet. No. Many people are asked the question as a hypothetical, if you were the only person on earth, what would you be doing all day? You have no one to fight with. There's no one to be jealous of. You have all the resources in the world. Most people are terrified of the prospect. They say, I'd commit suicide. I wouldn't know what to do. I'd be so bored. What does that tell you? That I don't know what I stand for, basically. Without others to juxtapose yourself around. I mean, it's a hypothetical. But these are questions that end up being critical because, the fact is, you are living the only one on this earth. Who else is living inside of you with your concerns and your loneliness? You all know you have a place inside of you that nobody can enter. So in a certain way, you are alone. So what's going on there? What do you do with that? The most important message that the Torah can give us when you say God, what is God? Many ways you can explain it, but ultimately it means that we are creating the image of God, that we are not temporary, negligible creatures. We are God-like, which means we have eternity inside of us. And your life choices are, you're going to choose the temporary path or the eternal one. And this choice, for my friends, is not easy to make. And most people on earth, from the beginning of time, chose the temporary. They chose instant gratification. That's why they're not here today. I would say as a nation, the only nation that chose eternity were the Jewish people. The others could have chosen. Why? We're the grandchildren of the Roman Empire. Direct descendants. That can talk about names of their grandparents. We're the descendants of that, for that matter, of Aristotle. He left a timeless wisdom and philosophies. We're his children. Did he even have children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren? How come nobody was invested in making sure that their ideas would last forever? I mentioned this several times. During the Holocaust, we know that the Jews would, they say, the witnesses that heard them sing Ani Mamin, I believe in complete faith that Mashiach will come, while they were going to the gas chambers. Said Kaddish, Shema. Now tell me, what kind of insanity is that? Of all places, God was more concealed than ever. In any way you could say, as we say in Yizkor prayer, we say, Ayah Hashem Elokeichem. One of the arguments we have to God is, when you allow a Holocaust to happen, you know what you give? You give food, fodder for anyone saying, where was your God, this great God of yours? Look what He allowed to happen to people of faith. And still Jews, when they were singing Ani Mam and Shema, they had every reason to deny God, because God denied them. Where does that come from? It comes from a connection to eternity that says, listen, you can take my body, but you can't take my soul. You can take me, but you're not going to take my faith. Because if it won't be me, it's going to be my children. If it won't be my children, it'll be my grandchildren. Now this sounds like obvious. Everyone should know that. But you see, not everybody knows that. How many parents neglect their children because it's about them? And they may think they love their children. They just don't know how. They're focused. They're selfish. They may not call themselves selfish, but they behave that way. In the Torah, there's a curse that says, mothers that will eat their children. So technically it means there will be such hunger that they'll be so desperate and hungry they'll eat their own children. Come on, do you know anyone that would do that? I know in the animal kingdom there are such. Not because they're necessarily hungry, whatever their reasons are. But psychologically, it makes sense. When a person's consumed with themselves, they're blinded, and therefore they could hurt even those they love. Not to quote this great paragon of morality, Oscar Wilde, but he had a lot of good lines, that guy. And he said, people kill the thing they love most. It's often true. It's not because we want to, because we're blinded. Subjectivity and so on and so forth. So, what Bilam was saying, and if you look at the gist of all his blessings, are all the same thing. That this is a nation that's eternal. It's not a nation that reckons with others and doesn't conform. It was all talking about eternity. And one of the things eternity is their homes. Their tents are beautiful. Technically, yeah, their doors don't face each other. You know why? Because they're not interested. They're not shaping themselves based on others. They have to see the neighbor to know what I have to do. Which is the beginnings of what essentially gossip is conceptually. That others are somewhat feeding you. The Kotzker Rebbe said about relationship, he said, if I am I because you are you, the door of my tent is facing yours, so I'm I because you are you, and you are you because I am I will not be and you will not be. But if I am I because I am I, and you are you because you are you, then I will be and you will be. Essentially, if your identity is defined by others, ultimately you're not going to be complete, and neither will they be complete because their identity is defined by you. Self-generated. Now, if these ideas are foreign to you, maybe tonight's a good opening to remember. You were born an original. You have everything inside of you to accomplish anything you need to accomplish. It's just that you're not aware of yourself. I just saw a note from the Rebbe to somebody who says, Rebbe, please send Hatzalah, send me help in my city. His name is Rabbi Moshe Hecht in New Haven. Moshe Yitzchak Hecht. Send me help. I guess he had a deficit, he had difficulties there. So the Rebbe answers him a very interesting answer. He says, Tarim Yikra V'Aniena, before you even called out, I already answered you. I actually sent you help. His name is Rabbi Moshe Yitzchak Hecht, and I guess you don't recognize him. Because I see from your letters and your lack of confidence that you probably don't recognize him, but if you got to know him, you'd find out that he has skills and powers that you wouldn't have this depression and this lack of confidence and fears that you have. That's what he told. Writing to him about himself. So do you think you know yourself? It's ultimately, when a person says, I don't have the power to do something, it's ultimately, that's an arrogant statement. Even though you say, what do you mean it's not arrogant? I don't feel I have power. It's humble. And that's not humble. Because who gave you the right to convince yourself you don't have the power? How do you know what you have? You really know yourself that well? So some people says, yes, I know myself. Well, that's why I say there's a God. Yes, if you were self-made, you built your own machine, fine, you know yourself. Like that scientist that tells God, listen, I don't need you. We don't need you. I can do anything you did. So God says, go ahead. He says, so the scientist takes a body of earth, a piece of earth, and is about to start, tampering and putting in chemicals or whatever to make things grow. So God says to him, no, use your own earth. He's taking God's earth and he's going to show that he can do what God does. Use your own earth. So if we were self-made, and this to me lies at the heart of what God is all about, why we need God. Someone asked me, what do we need God for? I'm getting into now the personal God, but let me put it this way. It's either you created yourself or someone created you. So if you created yourself, so fine, then you know yourself all well, and that's it. And you're doomed to your own, or you're destined to your own, whatever you think about yourself. You don't have confidence, that's it, too bad. But if there's a force that's greater than you are, and put you here, then the first thing you have to just acknowledge, nothing more, that you don't know yourself completely. You didn't build yourself. You don't know your machine. You know what you know. How much do we know about our own selves? You know the minimum. Maybe you know more about than others know about you. Maybe the other way around. Who knows? So that statement alone gives a person power. And that's why the Rebbe said to him, this toy can only drive fear into someone that has one world and many gods. So this issue of gossip, and I was not going to talk about gossip in a just to talk about the meaning elements of it, but really to get to the heart of energy. I know people who are consumed with talking about others, and they're actually very smart people. They actually understand other people, but instead of understanding people and using their understanding to help them, they use their understanding to talk about them. I met a guy years ago. He was for many years a therapist. He was a great therapist. I meet him one day. What are you doing now? I went into advertising, an advertising agency. How'd you get from here to here? He said, well, I do the same thing and I pay 10 times as much. There I was helping their emotions. Now I'm manipulating their emotions. Those are his words. And he gets paid a lot more. It's much higher salary to manipulate emotions than to that. So I said, give me an example. She told me about some campaigns. How do you get people to buy something? And his psychological background, when he was actually an excellent psychologist, he was using it. I'll call that gossip. Instead, worse than gossip. Basically using it. So I said, how can you do that? It's not ethical. He says, no, they have free will. They can buy whatever they want to buy, not buy. I said, I understand they have, but how about you? How'd you? He said, don't worry, I'll soon retire from this. Then I'll go back into therapy and heal all the people that I screwed up. So it reminded me of the what I read, that radar detectors are manufactured by the same companies that manufacture radars. So they manufacture the radar for the police. Then they come to us and they say, listen, we have a way to detect it. Then they go back to the police. We need a better radar because that they can detect it. That's, I think, a great business plan. You both sides of the, or who are the best? What they say in the New York Times, they had this article a few months ago that the biggest department in General Motors is what? Is their tax department. They have 1,000 people working just on basically finding ways to cut taxes, and they make more money from that than all the sales put together. And where do they hire these people? From the IRS. So here we go. We have people writing tax law, which obviously has loopholes. Then the people who know the tax law know the loopholes. Then you hire them back to fill those loopholes, and they'll create more loopholes. That's the story. So how could you be frightened by things like that if you're a real human being? Unless you become trapped in that world, and that becomes your steady source for nutrition, spiritual, psychological, and so on. Which is perhaps why the Talmud Mishnah says, "Ein lecha ben chayrin ela misha esig b'Torah." There's no one free except one who studies Torah. The interesting thing, it doesn't say everyone who studies Torah is free. So just for the record. But you can't be without Torah. You know why? Because the Torah doesn't talk about things of this world. Things of this world cannot cause you to be free. It's about this world. It can only add to your addiction to the world. You talk about some things that are higher, that lift you to a higher place, more spiritual place. Things that are not made of physical substance. That gives you freedom. So you don't become tied down and grounded by the gravitational pull of this world. Like the famous story, the famous analogy, when you're tied above, you don't fall below. That's what the previous Rebbe had. He was tied above. Now they told the story about the Blozhiner Rebbe, I believe it was. He was in a concentration camp with some of his Chassidim. They were in a particular camp where the commander was a very, more than usually, cruel, vicious. He had this game he liked to play. They all played these games. His game was that the Jews would dig these wide trenches. Whoever can jump over the trench, you live. If you can't, you fall in, you get shot right there. That was the game. You can imagine. Not just the killing, the dehumanization. Anyway, the Blozhiner Rebbe and the Chassid, they were there lined up. The Chassid says, Rebbe, I'm not jumping anywhere. Enough is enough. They're torturing us. Let's just die right here. The Rebbe says, as long as you have strength in you, as long as you have a breath inside of you, you have to do whatever you can. You never know. Okay, the game began. The game, quote unquote. Jumping, people shot. And it was, in the whole mayhem and confusion, no one knew who was what. A little while later, they were liberated. And both the Rebbe and that Chassid survived. They meet at some point. They're both shocked to see each other, because to survive that game and other games like that. And the Chassid says to the Rebbe, you're not a young man. How did you jump over that trench? He said, very simple. I closed my eyes. I thought about my father, my grandfather, great-grandfather. I held on to their kapota, which is their coat. and I jumped. I tied above. And what about you? How did you jump? How did you make it? He says, I held on to your kapot. Okay, so we're all holding on. That's good. It's the antithesis of the blind leading the blind. That's what it is. It's the seeing leading the seeing. This is the story of Yud Beis Tammuz tomorrow. It's the story of this chapter. And Bilam recognized it more than anybody. That's why he knew he can't touch these people. Because anything he would do, he's not touching a power. If the Jews were a big empire, okay, so weaken their empire. Go to war, take away their arms, take away their strong people. The same mistake Paroi made. What did Paroi say? When he heard from his stargazers who's going to come and redeem the Jews, it was to be a man, Moses. So he said, great idea, he had it, brilliant, he's a genius. Kill all the boys. So he said, Kol haben hayolud, tashlachu aliyam, they throw him into the sea. That way, the little Moses will never grow into the becoming of the big Moses. Well, it was a big mistake. Thank God he made this mistake. Why does he make this mistake? Because he projected, like we all do. He said, who's the power? The men. The women and children could be subdued. The men are the problem. So let's kill the boys before they grow up, and that was it. He made a little mistake. The little mistake was, like the mistake all anti-Semites made, that the power of Jews doesn't lie in brute strength, or in arms, or necessarily masculine, or in aggression. It lies in faith. It lies in spirit. What happened? When the men and women, the Jewish men and women heard about this decree, what did the men say? They're practical. They said, you know what, let's stop having children. Until this decree is over, he's going to kill every boy. The women said, listen, if we don't have children, we're never going to get out of this God-forsaken place. They had a vision. And we'd be succumbing. What are we going to do? We'll figure out. The Talmud says some women went to the field and had children. Yocheved, we know what she did. She took a little baby, Moses, she put him in a basket, she smeared it with the tar and so on, put it in the river Nile, and he survived. You needed one. Yes, were many little boys killed, unfortunately. But this little Moses made it. This Pharaoh cannot fight. How do you fight faith like that? With what? You can't shoot it. Because you shoot this, or there was another person with faith. You can't kill faith like that. The he shamdalanu, it says, we say in the Haggadah. What's the he? She withstood everything. All those that wanted to destroy. Some say the he is in the cave, lashon nekeva, it's in the feminine. It means faith, amunah. Neshama is in the feminine. The he and the promise, havtacha, the promise. That withstood. It's not a power said in the mysterious vihi, in the third person, the she. She withstood it all. And that's what they knew. They held on to this. And that's why we're here today. That's why the Rebbe said, Ver Vemen, who will see who will prevail. It wasn't a miracle or a curse or a blessing. He knew. Who prevails is those that hold on to eternity. The Rebbe held on to his grandparents' coat. That Chassid held on to the Rebbe. And you forge ahead. And you know there's some power stronger than you are. Don't think you are self-made and that starts and ends with you. Not your strengths are your own and not your weaknesses are your own. There's always more to the story. And Bilam recognized it very clearly, and he knew there's no way you can touch these people. You want to touch them? Get them to stop being internal. Let them succumb to their own, be seduced and succumb to their own temptations. Then you weaken the power. That's what he did, which is of course brilliant but terrible. So we are our own worst enemies, and we can be the greatest assets to ourselves when we recognize that power. Gossip is one expression of the frailties of a material world, busy with meaningless things because it doesn't have focus on what matters and what's eternal. There's no way that a person that is focused on, think for a moment, God forbid, no one should ever hear of this, but let's say you were involved, I said before, with children. You have 10 children in your care, and they're all over the place, and you've got to make sure that they come home safely. You have time for gossiping about people? Because there's a sense of urgency. There's a sense of purpose to your life. Problem is we have free time, or free time, which is a blessing on one hand because we don't have to run away from enemies. But what do you use it for? So the energy is there. We've got some free time. Imagine if we used all the free time toward positive revolutionary change. You understand people well. Instead of talking about them, why don't you figure out how to help them? Simple as that. Yeah, that takes a little more effort, a little more discipline, a little more focus. The lowest thing you can do is just, I understand people. I understand. I know people, every time they hear something virtuous someone does, they'll give you 35 reasons why there's some ulterior motive. So ask somebody, why? Who cares? Let's say he's doing something good. And who cares if there's an ulterior motive? No. I said, you feel better to know that it can't be a good, right? Because you're not doing anything good. So you feel better to make sure he's also not. I hear this, I've seen people, very charitable people. Then you hear someone who could give a lot of charity and says, that person is doing for this. And you say, so why don't you do it for the right reason? They're silent. They're always good at tell why everybody else is doing not good. I think the Rebbe told the same story. He was once in Paris and he gave somebody charity at night. So someone else came over to him and said, it says in Kabbalah, it's in the holy books, you're not supposed to give charity at night. So later he shared it with his father-in-law, the Bala Geula of this Beis Tammuz. His father-in-law says probably that person doesn't give charity by day either. Because why is he suddenly, of all things, all the mitzvahs, he's interested in helping someone. No, you don't do it by night. So he says probably by day he's also not doing it. It's interesting insight into human beings. So, my friends, let's sum up on a positive note like this. I hope I didn't speak any gossip here tonight, the last hour and a half. So that's already good. And since you're listening to me, you weren't thinking about gossip. So we're already an achievement. I want to bless you all that you should have enough to talk about, how to bring positive force into the world, that you don't have time to talk about other things. It's really all about that. You feel it positive, you influence, you will not be influenced. And now we can go home and watch our videotape of entertainment tonight. No, I'm just kidding. Like the rabbi.
Watch the videotape of this.
Right, exactly. Well, you can watch both. There's a lot of time on our hands. Have all night, a long night ahead of us. But that's the guy. The guy comes to the rabbi. There was the rabbi and his president who built a synagogue from scratch. And every year was a struggle to get people Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Finally, the rabbi comes to the president and says, this year, my friend, finally all our efforts are bearing fruit. We're going to have hundreds of people Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. And the president suddenly looks at the rabbi and says, of all years, this year the playoffs are on Rosh Hashanah. So the rabbi says, well, you've never seen a video? You've never heard of a video machine? He says, that's great, Rabbi. I didn't know you can videotape the entire service. So it all comes down to, again, what your priorities are. So I bless you all. Mateva Alecha Yaakov. You should build beautiful, pleasant tents. Today they're more permanent than tents, homes that give off light. And this also means on a walk, and we're walking tents. You walk in the street, when people come to you, do they feel drained by you, or do they feel empowered? Or do they feel ambivalent? You want to be a person that anyone comes in your presence, you feels strengthened. A good word, hope. We live in a world, there's enough tragedy and pain and loneliness that time for a few of us just make that decision. There's a ripple effect. Because when you give off light, it becomes contagious. That's how it is. The only thing in the world that doesn't get diminished by giving is a flame. You light a flame, it lights another flame. The first flame doesn't get diminished. On the contrary, it gets stronger because a few flames together is more powerful. Everything else gets diminished because it's all material things. I give you some, I have to have less. I may have the satisfaction. So we all have this flame inside of us with the ability to illuminate. So I bless you all that we should use this special week, the blessings of Bilam, of all people. The darkness feeds the light, and to turn it into a force of good. Simple basis, every day try to find something good to say about someone. That doesn't mean we're naive and we don't understand there's always also things to criticize. And share it. It all comes down to a few good people turning the tide. Tides are turned with a little shift, and it becomes that ripple effect that continues to reverberate. And we should all be blessed, especially in this day based time, is that we should all experience a so-called microcosmic redemption. As I said, by studying Torah, by lifting yourself up to things that are higher than the quotidian pedestrian level, that becomes the rope which holds us and carries us sometimes when we're below and we fall. Because we have something to hold on to. And we should all have something to hold on to forever, which will help us navigate and maneuver through this world And as always, it's a great honor to sit here and spend time with kindred spirits as we intersect in this world, and hopefully everyone goes back and brings your unique light, your unique music to your corner, your sphere of influence, your corner of the world. Thank you very much. Thank you. So tomorrow, Philip will be giving his class tomorrow night, Philip Namworth. I want to dedicate the class to Yosef Arya Leib Ben Liba Bluma, for Shlema, completed for Shlema. And we will continue Wednesday night next week. Please, any questions you may have or anything we can help you with, please email us, send us information. And it's an honor and pleasure to help in any way we can. Thank you so much.